Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review of the Expanse Season 3, Episode 7, Delta V. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of the Expanse. I'll have to start with a spoiler warning for the Expanse up to Season 3, Episode 7. If you haven't seen up to this point, you may not want to watch this video, otherwise some things may be spoiled for you. However, this video will not contain spoilers from the novel, so if you haven't read the novels, you are safe from book spoilers, but I will have a spoiler section at the end of the video for those who have read the novels, but I will give a proper spoiler warning before doing so. So this episode felt like a season premiere, and anyone, even those who haven't read the novels, can probably tell that this is the first episode that covers the start of Book 3, as this is a major change in direction for the story, and it was quite a significant time jump in which the Rocinante has to have a documentary team on board interviewing them. Anna is on a diplomatic mission sent to study the protomolecule ring system, sent by Avasarala, who is now the Secretary General of the UN, and Naomi is the chief engineer on board the retrofitted Nauvoo, now referred to as the Behemoth, the flagship of the new Belter state. And I thought this was a really interesting episode that did a great job of orientating the viewer into this new dynamic going forward. Parts of it did feel a tad bit rushed, but the episode never felt slow or like filler and did a great job of introducing us to the next stage in this story, so overall I really enjoyed it. So we start the episode with a speech from Avasarala where she pleads with the three superpowers of the system to work together in peace and help deal with this great new unknown threat of the protomolecule. And while she gives this speech, we get visuals of the protomolecule thingy that flew out of Venus changing shape to form a giant ring. And once it's finished, the subtitle tells us it's the ring near orbit of Uranus. So a couple of things we gleaned from this speech is, first of all, the war between Earth and Mars has ended, and with Avasarala's urging, they seem to be forming a alliance along with the belt where they are mainly working together to deal with this ring, which at the moment they have no idea what the hell it is. She also mentions Aaron Wright's arrest and Gillis's retirement. Now, we saw in the previous episode that Aaron Wright was being arrested, but I do love how she referred to him as the traitor Aaron Wright. But it is new information that Secretary General Gillis has stepped down, and apparently Avasarala is now the Secretary General. However, from the context in which she said it, we can infer that he didn't step down in disgrace and just politely bowed out, as she says, "We thank him for his service." Now, whether or not he bowed out because his legacy was now safe and he just didn't want to risk it all going to hell, so just stepped aside, or Avasarala had something on him and pushed him out, but in a way that he could save face publicly, I can't say. I hope this is something that will be touched on in the coming episodes, but either way, Gillis is out, Avasarala is in, which of course is a great thing, and she begins with trying to make peace, which for the most part she seems to succeed at. That being said, I get the impression that this piece is a bit, shall we say, fragile. At least it should be, seeing how not too long ago these superpowers were just at war with each other. But I'm sure we'll get more into that in future episodes too. So we get scenes with a lone belter pilot who seems kind of like, extreme sports type who does dangerous stunts for publicity. However, his stunts seem to involve like slingshotting around planets using their gravity in a tiny belter ship, and he refers to himself as a legend. However, more than that, he's used to getting a lot of publicity that is disappearing due to the fascination and mystery surrounding the protomolecule ring. So we see him do an epic stunt around Saturn, which seems to be the best stunt he's ever done, and yet no one cares because they're too preoccupied with the ring. And his girlfriend apparently leaves him for his brother. So feeling cheated, and very down and alone, he finally devises a way to reclaim his fame. Since everyone is so obsessed with the ring, his idea is to be the first person to fly into the ring. So he devises a plan to slingshot around Uranus straight into the ring. And when he tells his girlfriend of his plan, she encourages him by saying that she'll come back to him if he pulls this off. I liked all these scenes. They were a bit silly, but in an effective way. I must say, I found it really funny when his brother just walked by in nothing but a Speedo and just casually tells him to be safe. That was funny. And also, you do feel for him and totally buy his motivation for being, the dumbass thing that he's about to do. So I think this actually really works. So he goes ahead with this plan, and when the fleet's guarding the ring tries to stop him and threatens to shoot him down, he just feigns ignorance and say, "Oh, I'm just having a malfunction, no worries," until he's too close for them to do anything about it, and he's just like, "Screw you, dusters, too late." And then he flies straight in, and his body is ripped to shreds. Now, if you found this scene a bit confusing, I'm about to explain more of what happened based off of what I read in the novels. But since this hasn't been fully explained in the show yet, some may consider this a spoiler. However, I'm not giving away any future events, just explaining what happened in this scene. But if you consider this a spoiler, you can skip ahead several minutes. So what happened is the pilot suffered a sudden change in velocity and was basically ripped out of his seat and splattered against the wall. Something the show has established because it stays true to the laws of gravity and the laws of physics. The episode title itself speaks to this, as Delta V literally means change in velocity. So basically, as soon as the ship hit the ring, it slowed significantly instantly. Something that was no issue for the ship, but was fatal to any humans inside. So it's not that the ring killed the guy with like a death ray or something like that, but more of he went into it too fast, and it was too drastic a change in velocity. So theoretically, if one were to travel into the ring at a correct speed, they'd be fine. But as I said, I'm sure they'll get more into this in future episodes. So anyway, let me get more into the Rocinante. Now, I'm not sure, but I think they are once again calling it the Rocinante. I think Alex says the Rossi. So we can forget about this whole Pinus Contorta BS, which I was never on board with. At any rate, earlier in this episode, it specifies that 187 days have passed since the formation of the ring, which is a little over 6 months. However, we don't know exactly how much time had passed from the end of last episode to the forming of the ring, so you could say this episode takes place anywhere around 7 or 8 months after the previous episode. So it's been a little over half a year. And we get some real quick exposition as the Rocinante is part of a UN fleet approaching the belt, and there's a documentary team on board interviewing them. And they explain that Holden is being sued by Mars for possession of the ship, and they are claiming that it is theirs, and Holden is saying it's actually legitimate salvage. However, the case has to be taken to court, which is expensive, and so Holden is allowing this documentary director, Monica Stewart, and her cameraman on board because they're paying them a lot of money that they need in order to file this lawsuit. However, it is established here that they are a legitimate crew, where each crew member owns a quarter of the ship. I do believe this is the first time in the show they have been stated to be a legitimate crew, because before they were just always these outlaws on the run. Always on the run from something or someone, so it seems now they are recognized by Earth and the Belt as a legitimate ship. However, not so much with Mars, and that's something that they're still working on. Now, it hasn't been made completely clear why they are part of a UN fleet approaching the ring, but we do see a newscast from the Belter that referred to Holden as the hero of the Belt, and it was notably a Belter newscast, so it seems that they do hold him in very high regard in the Belt, which may have something to do with why he's there. And again, I hope they get more into this in the coming episodes. And I do love how Amos called Mars petty for suing them over the ship, seeing how they just saved their whole planet. And that is actually a pretty damn good point. At any rate, Amos and Holden are obviously very unhappy about having Monica Stewart on board, whereas Alex doesn't seem to mind the attention, and of course that makes Monica Stewart less interested in him. Although she does film him behind his back when he's having a private conversation with Bobby Draper, where we get further exposition that Bobby is a Marine again and is still on good terms with Alex, as she looked in on his family for him and talks about how good it was to be back on Mars. We also learned that Alex's wife filed for divorce, and I was a bit unclear before whether they were already divorced, but this episode makes it clear. Alex says that it's kind of a relief, and that's not too surprising to hear, seeing how he basically ignored her this whole time. At any rate, we see Monica getting a bit too annoying to Amos as she hounds him about his origins and pretty much reveals that he used to be a mob boss in Baltimore, and she's filming him very close up to get his reaction, but he reacts by destroying the remote camera, which was pretty expected knowing Amos. I absolutely love that scene. So Monica then offers to sleep with him to try to get him to open up to her more, but he turns her down, and then the cameraman comes on to him too, but he also turns him down. But we learn from their conversation that Prax has moved back to Ganymede with his daughter to help rebuild that colony, which makes a lot of sense. But it was nice to hear Amos talk fondly of Prax, and even how he says he's my best friend in the whole world, which is repeating what Prax said of him to May. So that was actually really touching. But I think that it's a clear indication that Prax is no longer a factor in the show and has been written off, which makes a lot of sense as the storyline is pretty much complete now. So Monica also hounds Holden, but unlike Amos, he doesn't let his anger get the better of him, as he can tell what she's trying to do, so instead he simply blows her off and says that he's going to go have a shower. But when we follow the cameraman, when he's by himself, we see that he's up to no good, as he's snooping around the Rocinante. What exactly is he up to? Well, we'll just have to wait and see. At any rate, after Holden gets out of the shower, he hears someone in his room muttering to himself. He goes in to find none other than Detective Miller. And when he blinks, Miller suddenly disappears. Now, Miller was muttering stuff that he said on the show before, like there's no law in a series, only cops, and other lines that he said before. So, last that we saw of Miller, he was on Eros being taken over by the proto-molecule, as he was talking to the proto-molecule-fied version of Julie Mao, just as Eros was speeding towards Earth like a missile, but he convinces her to divert it to Venus. And Julie asked him what is going to happen to them next. And his answer was, we die. And if we don't die, well, that will be interesting. And then Eros crashes into Venus, and what was left of it creates the weird jellyfish thingy, which will become the ring. And now Miller appears to Holden shortly after the Belter flew into that ring. So what does this all mean? Well, I guess we'll just have to watch and find out. But it's so great to see Thomas Jane on the show again. And if you saw the promo for next week's episode, you know we'll be seeing a lot more of him. And I, for one, absolutely cannot wait for that. So we also get a few scenes with Anna and some quick exposition that explains that a bunch of political and religious figures have gone on a UN ship called the Thomas Prince to explore the ring. And Anna states that the Secretary General made her an offer she couldn't refuse, and by Secretary General she of course is referring to Avasarala, not Gillis, as apparently she's completely funding her clinic back home in exchange for Anna going as a representative to the ring. No doubt Anna has proven herself trustworthy to Avasarala when she helped her take down Aaron Wright, so Avasarala wants someone whom she can trust to there. So we get a scene of Anna talking to the captain of the Thomas Prince, which was pretty much just a way to quickly recap what happened with the proto-molecule throughout the entire show, but it clarifies that nobody has any idea what the hell the ring is, and when Anna asks him what he thinks it is, he simply says that he hopes that it's inert. seeing how powerful the protomolecule has already proven to be so far. So in the novels, each book follows chapters from a few viewpoint characters, and we experience the entire story through these particular viewpoint characters. In book 1, there were only 2 viewpoint characters, Holden and Miller. In book 2, there were 4 viewpoint characters, Holden, Avasarala, Bobby Draper, and Prax. So book 3, which begins with this episode in the show, had 4 viewpoint characters as well, Holden, Anna, Melba, and Bull. Now, Holden, we all know and love. Anna, we met at the start of the season, so we already got to know her. So the 2 other names that may not sound familiar are Melba and Bull. And I'll get to Bull shortly. But first, let me talk about Melba, who we do meet in this episode. As we see Anna on the Timeless Prince, we then transition from her to follow a maintenance team which consists of 3 people. One of them is Melba, who is referred to by the others as New Girl. So obviously she hasn't been on board long and is new to the job. At any rate, we follow her as they go on board another ship in the fleet to do repairs, and she obviously doesn't have a very high opinion of Holden, as she refers to him as a narcissistic asshole. At any rate, we see that Melba is very nervous, to which her boss Ren takes it as she's just being nervous because it's her first day on the job. But we soon learn that it's more than that, because we see her planting a bomb on board that supply ship. Ren eventually discovers the bomb by accident, but Melba finds him, knows that he's discovered the bomb, and states that she wished that he didn't see that. He insists that he can help her and that he won't have to tell anyone about this, but she continues to say she just wished that he didn't see that. And eventually he warns her that he knows how to fight and doesn't want to hurt her, but then we see her do something with her mouth. And then she goes a bit crazy, and then we see her easily pick him up like he's just a piece of paper and toss him aside like nothing, and smashes his head against the wall, killing him instantly, and then she collapses to the ground herself. Now, this is another scene I'm going to explain, which is another thing some may consider a spoiler, as it wasn't explained very clearly in the episode itself, and no doubt we'll get into more detail about this in later episodes. However, if you found this scene confusing and wanted it explained, I'll do so. Otherwise, skip ahead a few minutes if you think it's too much of a spoiler. So, when you see Melba bite down with her mouth, she's using her tongue to activate an implant on the roof of her mouth. These implants release drugs into her system that allow her to have super strength and superior combat skills. It's described in the books as making time seem move a lot more slowly, which I was actually surprised we didn't get her point of view where we had like a slow motion sequence. I was kind of expecting that, but whatever, this works too. However, these drugs only last for a few minutes, and then they make the person who's taking them violently ill, which is why these implants aren't commonly used, because of the negative after effects. But of course, this allows her to easily kill people that she wouldn't be able to otherwise. I think this is something the episode was trying to portray in the scene itself, but it wasn't super clear. So as I said, I have no doubt this will be explained more in later episodes, and why she planted a bomb on this ship and what her ultimate plan is. But it's also interesting that she genuinely seemed regretful at having to kill Ren and really didn't want to, and she seemed very sad by this, and it's something that will probably bother her going forward. So it's obvious that she has a bigger plan, that she's willing to do things that she really doesn't want to do in order to accomplish this plan. So I mentioned the 4 viewpoint characters in book 3, one of them being Bull, and you may be thinking to yourself, well, who is Bull? I don't remember seeing any character named Bull, and that's because you didn't, as this character has apparently been cut from the show and Naomi has taken his place. In the novels, Naomi never left the Rocinante, so it seems part of the reason she did in the show is so that they can have a familiar character on the Behemoth storyline instead of introducing all new characters like they did in the books. As in the books, the captain of the Behemoth was Ashford, who was ill-prepared for the job and was just put there for political reasons. His first officer was Micho Pa, a hardened female OPA agent, and the chief engineer was Sam, who was a friend to Naomi who had worked on the Rocinante before, and the chief of security was Bull, an earther friend of Fred Johnson, who should have been the captain but for political reasons was made the chief of security instead. And Ashford and Pa didn't really think that much of Bull and treated him like an outsider, but Sam was a friend to Bull, which sometimes hurt her position. Now, it seems the show has taken these 4 characters and mushed them into Naomi, Drummer, and Ashford. Naomi and Drummer being characters we're already familiar with, and Ashford being the only character from the books that survived this transition. That being said, as you can probably already gathered, Ashford in the show is very different from his counterpart in the books. As I already mentioned, they sort of meshed all these different character traits from the 4 characters into these 3 show characters. In the show, Ashford is Drummer's first officer, where Drummer is the captain of the Behemoth, and Naomi is her friend and the chief engineer of the Behemoth. And Ashford is there as a result of a political agreement between the rivals Fred Johnson and Anderson Dawes, who are at an impasse over control over the OPA, and thus they have to compromise. Where Drummer is there to represent Fred Johnson, Ashford is there to represent Anderson Dawes. Other exposition we get in these scenes is that apparently during this time jump, the OPA has now become an officially recognized nation state of the belt and are struggling to set it up and be recognized as a legitimate nation. They're still new to this and are still wanting to be recognized as equals to Earth and Mars, and the Behemoth is their biggest asset. So it makes sense that they are sending it out to the ring to represent the belt. But in actuality, they are still retrofitting the Behemoth from a deep space generational ship into a battleship. And so it's kind of just a muddled together mess. And the leadership of the Behemoth is also a muddled together mess because it consists of 2 dominant factions of the OPA which have to compromise for the good of the belt, yet the underlying tension is ever present and undeniable. Now, Ashford himself is portrayed in this episode as a former pirate who apparently has done a lot of shady and less than moral things in the past that apparently has earned him a lot of enemies, but also a lot of respect from others. The character, as he's portrayed, does come off as an old pirate, and I love it. It adds a nice dynamic to the show. That and his connections to Dawes instantly establishes him as an antagonistic character. However, he does do a lot in this episode that makes a lot of sense and portrays him as a wise and sensible character. For example, he knows that he has more experience than Drummer, but still seems content with serving as her first officer, and he was wise enough to know that Drummer's solution to throw a drug dealer out an airlock is too archaic, and that the belt needs to be better than that if they want to be recognized as a legitimate nation state. And I love how Naomi even says to Drummer, "I don't like this guy either, but he's not wrong," showing that he does have some good points to make. And that's one of the things that makes this show so great, is none of the characters, even the antagonists, are simply evil mustache twirling villains, and there's always a lot more dynamic to them than that. And I do have to say, I absolutely loved the scenes between Ashford and Drummer. I absolutely loved these actors and the chemistry they have. Ashford, of course, is played by veteran actor David Strathairn, who starred in the Best Picture Oscar-nominated film Good Luck and Good Night, and as well as having supporting roles in many films, including the Bourne Identity films. And he does an amazing job as Ashford, but the actress who plays Drummer is amazing as well. And I think that's really showcased in this episode, how she does such a great job. And I love seeing her portrayal of Drummer play out on screen. It makes total sense why they would focus more on Drummer, a character who in the novels wasn't even introduced until book 5. It would make sense why they focus on her a lot more here, because we're already familiar with her and she's just a great character. So overall, I loved these scenes and thought they played out very well. The only thing I'm not completely sold on is Naomi's inclusion, but I suppose they needed to have a main character in this storyline to give it more legitimacy, but we'll see how this is handled going forward. So my rating for Delta V out of 10 is an 8. Extremely good. As I said, I thought this was a great way to transition into this new story dynamic, and we're introduced to a lot of great characters. I thought they did a great job at introducing Monica Stewart into the personate who plays this annoying reporter very well, and they did an amazing job introducing Ashford and the new dynamic he brings with Drummer and Naomi as the OPA struggles to be recognized as the legitimate nation state. But I think they could have done a better job introducing Melba, whose storyline does seem a tad bit rushed, but perhaps they'll get more into her in future episodes. And of course, the big shocker was Miller's appearance, and that was really awesome to see. So all in all, this episode has me really excited to see where things go from here. So that's it for my spoiler-free section of my review of Delta V. Be sure to check out my live discussion with Darren from D's Reviews on this episode, which will be live Friday night at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, U.S. time. There'll be a link for that in the description below. Also, be sure to check out my channel as I cover many other shows like Star Trek, Game of Thrones, Babylon 5, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching. However, for those who have read the novels, you can stick around for my spoiler section, which begins now. So the main thing I want to talk about is pacing. I love how the show did actually do a big time jump, because they had always avoided these time jumps in the past, but I mentioned in some of my prediction videos that I felt it couldn't be avoided here, and I turned out to be right, as we need a time jump to show that the OPA has become a nation state and to see the behemoth retrofitted, but mainly, as I mentioned before, with Clarissa Mal's storyline, as she needs time to set her plan in motion. Now, you may have noticed I referred to her as Melba in this review, which is her alias, and that's because the fact that she is Clarissa Mal, Julie's sister and Jules Pierre Mal's daughter, hasn't been revealed in the show yet, and thus is a spoiler. So please do not mention her name in the comments section without a spoiler tag. But I do like how this was handled in the show and how they are keeping it under wraps. That would explain why they didn't introduce her character earlier in the season like they did with Anna. They mentioned Clarissa by name earlier and talked about Mal's family, but we didn't actually see her. I thought that we might, but now we know why we didn't, because so we wouldn't know who she was in these scenes. And they kind of hinted at her real identity here by having her workmates talk about that scumbag Jules Pierre Mal and how it was so great that he was thrown in jail. That does add a nice dynamic to it once you know they are talking about her father, and she's not very pleased about this but trying to hide it. I thought the actress did a great job at that. And I think this was a great casting decision, as she really does resemble Julie Mal, and I totally buy that they're sisters. But that being said, I think they still could have done more to establish her, but perhaps they will in future episodes. I do wonder, though, if she was the one behind the lawsuit that Mars is filing against them like she was in the novels. I get the impression that she isn't, but maybe, because Amos does make a good point that it's kind of petty of Mars to file this lawsuit about the ship after they just saved her whole freaking world. Also, is Clarissa the one behind Monica Stewart being on the Rossi? This one I think is more likely, because in the novels she set it up that way so that she could have their spy which of course was the blind who was a sound man in the novels, but in the show is a cameraman, which I think makes less sense, but whatever. Anyway, we see him go spying around the Rocinante, so it's pretty self-evident that he again is working for Clarissa like she was in the novels, so perhaps she's the one behind putting Monica Stewart on there in the first place. As for the pacing, this episode shoots through a significant chunk of Book 3, and it skips over a lot of stuff that was a lot more explained and drawn out in the novels. Most notably, the lawsuit that Mars is filing against the Rocinante, which was a much bigger thing in the books, and the introduction of characters like Melba and Monica Stewart happened much quicker in the show than it did in the novels. So it does make me think that perhaps they may be trying to get to the end of the Book 3 material by the end of the season, which would change the typical way that the show functions, because usually the book will flow through into the next season and then end in the mid-season of the next season like it did this year. But as I talked about, there are 9 books, and apparently they plan on doing less than 7 seasons, or around 7 seasons, what I heard. So basically, they're going to have to speed things along if they want to catch up with the books, because typically they actually stretch storylines out more by adding in a lot of more material which wasn't in the novels, which they actually did a bit at the start of the season by having the storyline with the Martian survivors that the Rocinante picked up. And apparently the showrunners have stated that season 3 will not end on a cliffhanger, and this is, they mentioned this in case the show wasn't going to return, to put people's fears at rest, that if the show were to end, that it wouldn't end in the way that would leave people hanging. But we know that the show will be returning for season 4, knock knock. But that statement is interesting because it could imply that season 3 will end with the end of the Book 3 material, which would make sense because there needs to be an even bigger time jump between the Book 3 and the Book 4 material, so it would make sense to do that between seasons, especially if it's going to transition to a new network. But it doesn't necessarily mean that, because I did think there was a clear midpoint in Book 3 where they could end season 3, and that's with the wrap up of Clarissa's storyline, and then the rest of the book moves into the Ashford Mutiny storyline. So it's possible season 3 will end there with Clarissa's storyline, and season 4 will start with the Ashford Mutiny storyline, which could also be seen as a good stopping point. But the pacing of this episode makes me think that they may just try to wrap up all of Book 3 by the end of the season. But if they did, I don't know how I'd feel about that, because I can't see it being done in a way that would feel incredibly rushed. But maybe not. I don't know. Maybe I'll be surprised. We'll have to see. And I'm still unsure if they will include Avasarala and Bobby Draper in the rest of the season, or if they will take a break, much like they did in the novels. It doesn't appear that they are going to the ring, as Draper stated she was still on Mars, which I think is a missed opportunity, as she would made a pretty good face for the Martian presence in the ring, but whatever. If they did make up new storylines for Avasarala and Draper that happened away from the ring, this could be a way to pad the season out so they don't blow through the entire Book 3 storyline by the end of the season. But if they did want to get to the end of Book 3 material by the end of the season, then leaving Avasarala and Draper out of it would be a good way to reach that goal. But these two characters are always, especially Avasarala, who's been there since the very beginning, have always been major characters, so I kind of find it hard to believe that they would just leave them out of the rest of the season entirely, but we'll just have to wait and see. Anyway, that's all I have for spoilers, so I'll see you guys next time.